Deep in the wilderness, a strong pack of bears discovered a secret clan of wolves that had been abandoned. What the? It exceeded all expectations. It was an instance of nature in its unadulterated state. That in this remarkable encounter with the furious left everyone completely stunned. When bears encountered weak wolves, an unexpected turn of events occurred that called into question everything we believed to be true. Deep into an untamed forest, where old trees whisper about compassion and survival in the wild. The untamed terrain conceals both cruelty and beauty and long-forgotten mysteries. An incredible discovery was. On a cool autumn morning, just as daylight was breaking, the story of survival in the woods was about to change. Bathed the woodland in shades of amber and gold. A big pack of bears, under the command of their powerful alpha, wandered close to a isolated valley, their acute senses sharpened by years of wilderness survival abruptly discovered a strange smell and a slight sound that directed them to a secret opening in which, strewn around the woodland floor, were. The sight of the bunch of deserted wolves was both mysterious and painful. Young puppies and skinny adults abandoned to fend for themselves in a hostile setting that showed them no kindness. Narrated a tale of abandonment and maltreatment with great sadness and mute pleads. It showed a group left behind, which ran counter to the ferocious idea of a flourishing wolf pack. Unknown powers made them exposed as the bears carefully approached there. Something unexpected started as the wolves' fragile, quivering bodies contrasted sharply with enormous, muscular proportions, to reveal the dominating bear, which is usually a representation of unrelenting strength and instinct stopped, and its normally calculating and icy gaze briefly melted in. The atmosphere changed with one pulse of silence, and the ruthless bears seemed to have been captured. In a precarious equilibrium between instinct and an inexplicable kindness. Observing from a safe distance and concealed among the thick forest, observers were astounded by the surreal beauty of the here, in a world where survival is paramount and violence is frequently characterized, nature was providing a glimpse of a unique bond that went beyond the bear's typical predator-prey cycles. The abandoned wolf feigned but hopeful stare and sudden hesitancy set the stage for a string of. This is the tale of incidents that would surprise everyone and contradict accepted beliefs about the wild. Remarkable experience where the lines separating compassion and aggression were crossed as the wild demonstrated its potential for both unanticipated compassion and destruction. It's a story that will leave you, challenging your understanding of nature and motivating you with the assurance that hope can endure even in the most trying circumstances. Awaken on a cool autumn morning, the forest was teeming with a peaceful vitality as nature started its everyday. Hiding amidst the rocky underbrush and tall pines, a sizable pack of bears. They strolled along a well-traveled path, close to a remote valley under the guidance of their strong alpha. Their presence was soothing and powerful, demonstrating the power and discipline that controlled the wild. Yet as the bears' keen senses picked up on something completely unusual when they ventured off the usual route. The bears found a secret clearing surrounded by fallen leaves after following an odd scent. The environment was bleak, with a few wolves abandoned among twigs. Heartbreaking contrast to the typical grandeur of a healthy pack. These wolves seemed exhausted and haggard. Neglect survivors' eyes, which were filled with quiet desperation, expressed the stark contrast of a life abandoned to its own devices was heartbreaking. The strong, commanding bears on one side or the other, the defenseless, deserted wolves, whose delicate bodies initially trembled in the chilly, early air. With a sense of superiority, they walked about the area, their enormous bodies throwing lengthy shadows over the little wolves. A dominant bear, typically the pinnacle of unadulterated predatory power, pauses as though for a brief period, its deep, dark eyes, which often only show instinct and hunger, softened as it thought. This tiny delay disturbed the flare of uncertainty that defied expectations. Among the spectators concealed in the surrounding trees, the scene's natural order caused whispers. It was a moment of quiet tension, as if the bear itself were challenging the established order of predator and victim, the abandoned. Wolves, on the other hand, responded with a mix of terror and fervent hope. Some of the older, more seasoned ones huddled together, their small bodies quivering against the unrelenting cold. The youngest pups, unable to completely understand their desertion, gazed up at the bears while the wolves maintained a tired distance. With wide, terrified eyes, the harsh contrast of nature suddenly became. The once proud emblem of the wolf, an animal renowned for its tenacity and solidarity, was now reduced to. There was a noticeable hush as the dominant bear approached, leaving a bunch of defenseless animals in a condition of despair. The bear's enormous paws walked gently on the moist ground across the clearing, each stride precise and measured, and despite its threatening appearance, there was a faint undertone of empathy. That, for unclear reasons, the bear's motivations went beyond hunger. The alpha's collective conduct, which is usually defined by uncompromising aggression, took on an intriguing quality. Hesitancy appeared to indicate an internal struggle and a brief break in the never-ending predator-prey cycle. Naturalists, wildlife photographers, and human watchers in the area who had been documenting odd animal behavior stared in startled stillness as they were concealed by dense foliage. Every minute they spoke in whispers about the bizarre event playing out in front of them was recorded by cameras. Group of bears around a pack of straggler wolves, their faces blank as they looked around. The awe and fear filled the air as these spectators pondered whether the frantic humans in front of them were real. They were taking in a once-in-a-lifetime sight, and the forest itself appeared to contain its breath, the subtle contrast between light and shadow, the crisp sound of leaves rustling, and the faraway sound of a bird calling, all worked together to intensify the feeling that something was about to happen because of the bear's strange behavior, particularly the dominating bears. A brief episode of nearly human-like empathy caused the bystanders to ask a number of questions. These magnificent animals behaved strangely because of change in the surroundings, or was this a subtle, intuitive reaction to the wolf's extreme vulnerability? The first difficulty was evidently the wolves that had been left behind were in terrible shape. Their thin bodies and troubled eyes revealed years of neglect. The harsh realities of the forest had not been kind to them, causing them to starve, leaving them weak and confused, in contrast to the bears that are representative of survival and strength were able to take control of the clearing without hesitation. But in a surprising turn of events, the bear's response was not just predatory. There was also an underlying, unexplainable element. These suggested to the human viewers a more profound and even ancient relationship between these creatures. This remarkable moment questioned the traditional perception of the wild as a place and was both tragic and enlightening. Controlled by basic, ruthless instincts and compelled to reevaluate natures. The contrast between the strong bears and the weak, deserted wolves is complex. Brought up important issues regarding the survival community and the invisible ties that could bind even the most vicious predators. As the morning went on, the situation in the clearing became even more tense with the most susceptible victims. With its eyes darting back and forth, the dominant bear, still hovering at the group's edge, seemed to be making a decision. The atmosphere oscillates between the tiny, quivering wolf and the rest of their family, was filled with doubt, and every animal in the clearing served as a mute observer of the drama that was taking place. In this delicate environment, the groundwork was being laid for something spectacular that would resist the harsh logic of the wild and astound everyone who witnessed it right away. During that bizarre encounter, the clearing served as a backdrop for an unvarnished demonstration of nature's inner turmoil, as the uncertainty shook its ranks as the paws of the dominant bear remained, leaving the wolves weak and in need, stayed huddled together, their eyes flickering with wary curiosity after having been filled with despair. They watched how the nearby predators behaved at that precarious juncture when the force dynamics started to emerge, to suddenly change a few minutes after the original tense moment. A gentle whimper, swiftly followed by a frightened cry, came from the center of the pack of wolves that had been left behind. The sound of the almost hesitant cry seemed to reverberate off the old trees. An older wolf's fur is strewn with the group's anguish over neglect and their frantic need for safety. It went slowly forward, its eyes gray and reflecting years of adversity. The older wolf's cautious approach toward him seemed to test the delicate equilibrium between defiance and acquiescence. The group of dominant bears was seen with a mixture of caution and interest. This quiet exchange suggested a more profound exchange of ideas, a secret struggle for life that went beyond simple dynamics of predator and prey, while the forest silently observed the atmosphere, was abruptly punctured by the appearance of an unexpected element from the clearing's edge, where the thick foliage converged. It was a local wildlife researcher named Doctor who appeared in the open sky. Reports of strange occurrences in the area drew Elena Morales in. With her camera draped over her shoulder and her gaze focused on the landscape, she entered the clearing in silence, presented the bears with a new dilemma that was both obtrusive and filled with sincere care. Their instincts were conflicted between defending their territory and looking into this strange smell, so they recoiled a little. Atypically, Dr. Morales knelt at a safe distance and spoke calmly before starting. "I've never come across the practice of taking notes on a digital notepad before," she said. Her scientific mind raced, attempting to justify the incomprehensible tenderness, more for herself than for anybody else. She observed that the dominant bear's raw aggressiveness, which was still simmering on the periphery, its melancholy cries and the quiet that follows could suggest the presence of these discarded wolves, who carried the tangible aura with them, may have caused internal turmoil of human carelessness, while a small group of locals are concealed behind a fern stand at the edge of the clearing. Naturalists and photographers conversed in whispers, and one of them, a young photographer named Laura, took the "Look at that," she said, pointing to the elder wolf as it cautiously approached one in the changing scene on her camera. "It's almost like they're comforting each other," she said to the younger cubs. A discussion on whether this activity was a natural kind of pack behavior was sparked by comments that excited the group. Relationships were a last-ditch effort to survive during a time of acute vulnerability inside the wolf pack. Became more intricate. The senior wolf's hesitant demeanor appeared to encourage some of the younger ones. And soon after, there was a slight change. Instead of just cowering, the cubs started to imitate its circumspect motions. Their huge, incomprehensible eyes gazed toward It seemed as though the senior wolf was trying to convey a message of terror and hope to the dominant bears. Resilience, encouraging the younger generation to remain strong despite overwhelming misfortune since these internal. As the dynamics unfolded, Dr. Morales kept documenting and using her analytical voice. She mentioned in her report that there is a sort of unspoken language here that is laced with empathy and talks about the way these wolves showed desperation, reconciliation, and possibly even forgiveness. Communicate as though they're attempting to regain trust after being let go by uncontrollable events. Real-time audio recordings of words serve as a link between the glaring cruelty of the prior conflict and the newfound potential for healing and reconnection, but not all were. A skeptic local ranger was persuaded that this new trend represented a hopeful conclusion among the observers. We must keep in mind that Mr. Thompson, who had witnessed his fair share of violent confrontations, warned that the forest is a place of ongoing conflict, and that what we're seeing might just be nature's method of rebalancing itself following a traumatic incident does not always indicate that a greater purpose is at play. Some found resonance in his pragmatic viewpoint, which added a degree of intensity to the otherwise intense scene. As the hours went by, the interaction between the dominating bear and the wolves that had been abandoned became a microcosm of the larger. There were battles going on in the forest, and it wasn't simply about brute force anymore. It had developed into a complex dance of vulnerability, resiliency, and optimism for Dr. Morales' recovery. Provided a powerful illustration of how, even under the most dire circumstances, the wild can exhibit unanticipated empathy and solidarity in a climactic turn that would pave the way for what was to. The sound of distant engines rumbling through the forest announced the advent of more human action. Serve as a clear reminder that the wild was never distant from the increasing human presence, and that the community's continuous discussion on the extent to which external forces were endangering the natural balance The need for assistance had become even more urgent if the forest was genuinely being controlled or taken advantage of by human interests. Then every move would have significant ramifications in light of these developing subplots, and rising tensions in the clearing scene became a living tapestry of entwined fates, serving as a reminder that every emotional moment and fear was closely linked to the greater fight for justice and survival. A group of lonesome, weak wolves appeared just as the drama appeared to be unfolding in accordance with nature's cruel script. Amidst a formidable predatory bear pack, it became apparent that given that the main bear's hesitancy had left the wolves, one could have predicted amid the tense quiet and disarray. Shuddering in terror, a sudden change swept across the clearing, redefining the entire interaction in the dominant bear, with its enormous body and steely gaze, had earlier indicated an extraordinary time amid the circling bears. Of uncertainty, cautiously and gently moved ahead rather than, as instinct would have it, it came close to one of the youngest and most defenseless cubs and launched a final attack. In a moment that seemed to stop time, the bear dropped its head, its eyes shining with innocent fear. For a few excruciating seconds, its eyes met the cub's in a nearly human manner, the stare full of a complicated blend of grief acknowledgement and incredibly tenderness witnesses. The domineering bear, the epitome of raw, was concealed behind the trees, and they could not believe what they were witnessing. Savagery and power had shown a willingness to defend rather than prey in hay. It gently, almost ritualistically, pushed the youngster with its enormous muzzle as, when urged to approach, the cub, initially immobilized by terror, hesitated. He then cautiously approached the bear in a breathtaking show of trust. This surprising encounter was the initial inversion of the natural order, defying centuries of recognizing the mechanics of predator-prey relationships. The dominant bear made a sign of protection, an act that made it difficult for the viewers to distinguish between a compassionate act and a furious impulse. Naturalists and animal photographers from the area who had been documenting the drama became silent. Among others, by the scene, rumors circulated that they had actually seen a bear. An animal with a reputation for unrelenting rage holds a helpless cub in. The entire group was rocked by the enigmatic act at that moment, and some people surmised that the bear must have identified the youngster as belonging to a vanished pack, possibly the remains of a once thriving group that had been wiped out by natural disasters or human intervention. Questioned if the behavior was an isolated incident or a temporary deviation from the harsh laws of the wild, which are the prevailing. As the bear persisted in gently nudging the cub, another shocking revelation occurred. The other bears in the group, who had been ready to attack, started acting confused and aggressively. Softened, they began to retreat a little, as if unsure of how to respond, rather than moving forward as a single unit. The delicate balance of power in the clearing had responded to this extraordinary demonstration of interspecies love. Been disturbed, the situation changed from one of unavoidable violence to a complex balancing act between instinct and empathy. A dance that suggested a more profound, possibly prehistoric bond between these animals at that time, the human. Witnesses who had long believed that the forest was a place where the unbending rules of survival applied felt their impressions start to move between them. Jack, a local hiker who had been recording each, as he captured the incident on his camera, the detail of the encounter left him speechless. I've spent years in these. It's as though nature itself is difficult. He later wrote in his journal, "Woods, and I've never seen anything like this." His remarks struck a profound chord with many, sparking a wave of internet discussion on our sense of cruelty and compassion. Articles and online debates that challenged all of the accepted wisdom regarding predator behavior at the same time. Dr. Morales, a reputable local wildlife biologist who had been keeping a safe eye on the issue, provided, rarely, according to her own scientific understanding, have dominant predators in the animal kingdom exhibited protective behavior toward other species' vulnerable individuals, as she clarified in a follow-up interview. Although this type of conduct is extremely rare, it implies that under some situations, the strict limits of the ability of predators and prey to become flexible may be a way for an ecosystem that has been upset to retain equilibrium. Her careful theory gave an intellectual viewpoint despite external demands to the community's emotional shock, implying that the unexpected deed may have originated in. The twist extended beyond the bear's behavior and included other naturally occurring adaptive traits that are still poorly understood. Later, as the tender exchange went on, it became evident that the cub's response was similarly. Amazingly, instead of fleeing in fear, the small wolf pup, whose life had, characterized by terror and desertion, stayed motionless, its eyes wide with a mix of doubt and a dawning. The cub's subtle request for safety was acknowledged in that brief but impactful exchange. For protection was addressed in the most surprising manner. This initial turn of events or significant disclosure caused shockwaves. In a single, pivotal moment, the dominant bear's act of kindness throughout the clearing had changed the guidelines of interaction between the predator and the prey as the situation leveled out over time. Bear's initial perplexity started to give way to an unwritten agreement within the pack, which had been ready to strike with deadly might now surrounded the defenseless wolves with a protective ring, behavior that echoed a delicate, recently found sort of affinity and brotherhood. The unexpected turn that changed the transformation of a tragic occasion into one filled with optimism implied that the dynamics of the wild were far more complex than anticipated. It revealed a world of inquiries. Was this a singular oddity, or did it suggest a flexible reaction to outside disruptions? Could human intervention or the human observes the realization that environmental changes are impacting these animals' conventional functions? Was a pivotal event that made them reevaluate the fundamental characteristics of wild behavior, the sudden manifestation of, in addition to defying expectations, a strong predator's empathy suggested a hidden intricacy in the complexity of a natural world, where compassion and violence coexist in fear and, in the short term, protection could coexist in a delicate transformative balance. Following the shocking discovery that the dominant bear had, in contrast to all expectations, displayed tenderness, the area turned into a testing ground for both human emotions and animal instincts toward the defenseless cub. Everyone who saw it was shook by this incredible turn of events, which forced both the wild animals and the human. Observers should modify their understanding of the wolf's genuine nature. The repercussions of that sudden event were seen in the earlier conflicts. The scarred wolf that had previously led the pack now appeared to be wearing a mixed face of grief and hesitating relief. Eyes that had been honed by a lifetime of surviving in a hostile environment now softened as though considering a little break in the vicious cycle of prey and predator that the younger wolves first experienced. Shuddering and hunched in terror, they started to change their behavior gradually. A few stepped hesitantly toward their senior, their bodies low and wary as though they were looking for direction and assurance. In that one instance, the pack had experienced the potential for empathy, idea that had always been alien to the brutal logic of the wild, where the dominating bear's sudden gesture spread throughout its family, and the other bears, taken aback by their leader's kindness, discovered themselves in a state of confusion. Their typically combative stances gave way to wary, somewhat perplexed looks as they attempted, for a moment, to make sense of this deviation from their deep-rooted instincts. The bear's intricately linked structure failed, displaying a conflict between the need to dominate and a developing, nuanced sense of restraint. The wildlife experts in attendance were aware of internal conflict and pointed out that even the most powerful animals might show indications of empathy in uncommon circumstances, maybe as an adaptive reaction. In the meanwhile, environmental stressors, or strained social ties, as they recorded every scene on their cameras while concealed among the woods, the human witnesses felt a rush of. Jack, who had meticulously recorded the entire event, was clearly rattled by mixed feelings. His journal notes from that night would subsequently disclose a severe mental conflict and the unadulterated agony of seeing this kind of violence mixed with awe at nature's surprising kindness. Witnessed numerous brutal encounters in the wild, which he later documented, but never one in which a predator showed compassion to the. It contradicts all I believe to be true about these creatures' defenselessness. Many in the tiny group of naturalists found resonance in such statements, and they started to doubt their long-held convictions regarding. Officer Ryan was also profoundly impacted by the unchangeable laws of nature. It had taken him some time to change from a strict enforcer of the law to a sympathetic advocate, but the events marked a turning point in his viewpoint that morning. Later that night, in quiet periods, Ryan was spotted. When speaking to his co-workers, he used a quiet, reflective tone. What we witnessed today, he stated quietly, was not merely an anomaly in animal behavior. It indicates that there might be forces operating in our forests that are not easily explained. Narrative of survival. We need to take note of this, since it could alter our strategy for protecting animals in the future. His thoughtful analysis provoked a number of conversations among the officers, many of whom acknowledged that the unexpected sensitivity and a renewed dedication to comprehending the intricacies of nature had been sparked by the occurrence. The tale of the empathetic bear and the quivering cub was told at a later community gathering at the town hall, sparked a heated debate in which fervent environmental activists denounced the conventional perception of the wild as a place of unrelenting cruelty. One campaigner declared demonstrates that even at its most basic state, nature can be merciful. Therefore, we must not let our antiquated ideas of predator versus prey prevent us from seeing the potential for compassion and harmony. However, the room's practical voices warned that such exceptional events should not result in an unduly romanticized perception of nature, even though what we saw was amazing. An experienced authority stated that since wild animals follow their instincts, this might be an exception. The conflict between idealism and practicality highlighted a fleeting moment of weakness in an otherwise harsh society. Larger social discussion over the proper way for people to engage with nature. Among Emily's family members, who had been deeply touched by their previous success in saving the newborn wolf Hope At first, the family had rejoiced over the wonder of their wildlife, but the emotional terrain was as turbulent. But the revelation of the bear's surprising kindness added a level of complexity that was challenging to reconcile with daily life. Her spouse conveyed cautious optimism, indicating that these infrequent occurrences could spur fresh ideas for protecting nature, while the defenseless youngsters, unadulterated love for the animals, and found it difficult to comprehend why such generosity would arise among beings renowned for their fierceness were exposed by their naive inquiries and sincere conversations at the dinner table. A strong, unsaid yearning to close the gap between the fantastical and the everyday. Wish to view the wild as a place where empathy and hope could grow instead of a place of never-ending conflict. Became evenings when the story was covered by the local media, which combined sensationalism with sincere investigation. Reporters spoke with local elders, wildlife specialists, and even some of the bystanders who had witnessed the event. Posts on social media with hashtags like Nature Heals and Gaju Wild Mercy quickly went viral, weaving a digital tapestry of shared experiences and mutual awe. The episode had evolved from a singular occurrence to a representation of the complex and occasionally contradictory character of wildlife includes all of these interconnected responses and adaptations in the animal kingdom and the human community served as the foundation for a new narrative, one that questioned accepted wisdom and forced everyone to consider the surprising chance that there was anything buried behind the wild's brutal surface. Currents of sympathy and solidarity in the quiet hours after the disturbance, as each creature and human wrestled with the ramifications of that bizarre experience. The scene was prepared for a change that would have an impact well beyond the boundaries of that tragic clearing as the first shock of as bears learned about the wolves that had been abandoned. Additional levels of intricacy began to appear in the forest. What initially seemed to be a lonesome, sorrowful setting, a group of bears coming into contact with abandoned, vulnerable wolves over time exposed a network of more complex, interconnected issues that threatened to disrupt the natural order and raise important issues regarding survival and exploitation. One of the initially More difficulties emerged when local wildlife monitors started documenting comparable occurrences in other. A small group of hikers found signs of other wolf groups abandoned close to logging zones in certain regions of the forest, with obvious evidence of disregard and even intentional abuse of their images. Posted on community boards with hashtags such as Forgotten Wolves, presented a depressing image of wolf packs that had been abandoned, looking thin and confused, their eyes a reflection of years of suffering. The episode in the clearing may have been a part of a wider pattern of human meddling, according to reports, connected to illicit hunting or deforestation, prompting serious concerns regarding the actual scope of exploitation in the area, along with the emergence of local environmental activists. To compile information from several sources at a hurriedly scheduled meeting, Carmen, a fervent campaigner, displayed field notes and maps describing odd disturbances close to multiple forests clearings. We've discovered that regions with a lot of economic activity or recent logging frequently exhibit indications of intentional disregard, she contended. These disturbances are not coincidental events. Rather, they indicate that someone are leaving these wolf packs to fend for themselves. Her research raised concerns about the potential that profit-driven corporate interests could be partially to blame. This industrial exploitation storyline started to thread itself into these tragedies, itself into the main plot, implying that human greed was the reason behind the wolves' abandonment. At the same time, a new subplot surfaced from social media, a digital realm, flooded with user-submitted anonymous postings alleging that they have spotted mysterious individuals close to recognized wildlife routes under. Using hashtags like wild and hidden hands, many shared their spooky experiences, with unknown individuals carrying odd objects that looked like sophisticated surveillance equipment. A particularly striking video captured a glimpse of a dark-clad individual adjusting what seemed to be a tiny. These digital hints from a small tracking gadget close to an overgrown route suggested a potential coordinated endeavor to keep an eye on or even control the actions of the forest residents. If human technology was being utilized to monitor these wolves' movements, the ramifications were astounding. Neglect may be a component of a bigger, clandestine scheme intended to exploiting wildlife for financial gain, which sparked additional interest among local historians to examine historical documents in order to find trends in previous wildlife disturbances. Mr. Redbird is an elder with extensive oral traditions, found mentions of comparable incidents in the area's ancient newspaper. Clippings described a time when widespread hunting and deforestation resulted in enigmatic. There is a recurrent pattern of animal disappearances and abrupt, violent interactions between predators and discarded animals. At a neighborhood event, Mr. Redbird described the nature of these tragedies, saying, When nature is disturbed, our ancestors thought, it sends signals, sometimes in the shape of a protective uprising, and occasionally as an appeal for assistance. His study linked the current circumstance to long-forgotten customs of exploitation and disregard, implying that the current situation may be a recurrent cycle brought on by human intrusion, while the wolf packs themselves exhibit subtle internal conflicts started to emerge, and observers saw that some wolves, despite being obviously weakened by neglect, displayed strange actions. In one case, an older wolf was observed trying to guide the pack to a nearby water source alone. The younger puppy's reluctance to accept this unexpected dynamic suggested a breakdown in traditional pack hierarchies could be an indication of new adaptation tactics, or perhaps a stress reaction to outside influences. The internal conflicts within the wolf packs among the deserted groups highlighted the larger subject of the natural story is complicated by the conflict between vulnerability and survival, with elements of social breakdown returning in. Emily's family, whose house had once been a haven of kindness when they took and rescued. As they celebrated the incredible rescue of a wild animal, they were engulfed in a whirlpool of emotions. The emerging evidence of systemic abuse and industrial intervention in a previous event with a lone cub brought up new issues, and late-night discussions showed that their anxiousness was increasing and that their haven could constructed to be endangered by the very forces they aimed to counter this internal. Family arguments weighted their dedication to wildlife rescue, adding a personal dimension to the overall conflict, against worries about their personal security and the possible consequences of opposing influential interests through accounts of such neglect in other parts of the forest in these interwoven subplots. Signs of industrial exploitation and clandestine surveillance, past instances of wildlife mistreatment, and internal conflicts between wolf packs gave rise to a larger story about the formerly unique case of wolves that were left behind, had now developed into a complex issue that called into question the ecosystem's integrity and the moral obligations of the human society. Each new piece of information, each digital post, and each whisper. Historical evidence reaffirmed the pressing necessity to alleviate the wolves' immediate suffering as well as, additionally, the structural elements that made it possible for these tragedies to continue in the days after the remarkable meeting in. The initial shock of seeing a bear pack find and engage with wolves that had been abandoned started to enter a time of uncomfortable introspection. Both animal and human societies had to face the deep emotional issues brought up by the incident issues that made it difficult to distinguish between natural compassion and the bear's violent incursion had not only jeopardized the wolves' physical safety, but also their ability to survive. Observers of their pack's social structure also observed that some of the older wolves, who are often the pillars of strength, appear perplexed and even exposed in their groups. In one moving example, an experienced wolf who had previously leading her pack, she started to pace close to the clearing's edge, her eyes clouded with doubt as she looked at the younger pups. Looked to her for comfort, already worn down by desertion and neglect, but got only a hesitant, almost dejected reaction to this internal chaos within the wolf packs. Highlighted a significant conundrum. How does a society used to the unbending rules of nature react when those vary? Unexpected acts of kindness or defiant initiatives can overturn laws. The emotional landscape was as turbulent for the human witnesses and the jackos who had recorded his views on the natural order were called into question by the shocking display of unanticipated behavior amid previous chaos. He described the bizarre moment when the dominant bear's eyes softened among the predators in his private journal, and its hostility was replaced by a brief feeling of sympathy for the defenseless cubs. I've always thought of nature as ruthless and cruel, he thought. Yet tonight I saw a glimpse of something nearly human, a tenderness that defies the strict guidelines we've been accustomed to. Jack's internal turmoil was reflected by his co-workers, many of whom found it difficult to balance the natural need to survive with instances that implied a more profound, nearly moral aspect to animals. Conduct Officer Ryan, whose change from a rigorous rule enforcer to a kind protector had been late, one of the investigation's most notable turns was when he began to wrestle with his own moral quandaries. He confided in a close friend that night, after watching the video and going over the witness accounts again, something I never thought I'd observe a bear exhibit such hesitancy, as though it were doubting its own essence. It makes me question whether these animals are more complex than their instincts, and whether empathy could possibly exist in. His words, which were filled with both awe and anxiety, spoke to the heart of the wild. Increasing awareness that the world was much more complicated than his simplistic predator-prey paradigm. Once accepted this internal conflict between keeping a professional distance and admitting the unfiltered. Because empathy is frequently erratic, there was a constant tension that affected every choice. He now had to deal with the equally divided emotional reactions in the society. At local town hall gatherings, conservative politicians warned and fervent environmental activists battled. We must avoid romanticizing these infrequent instances of compassion in order to avoid over-intervention. One council member is adamant that wild animals should not be messed with because their instincts rule them. Activists said that instances like the bear's unexpected kindness demonstrated weaknesses in the inflexible structure of nature, indicating that even the wild may react to sincere concern if a. One activist said, if bears can demonstrate compassion, just think of what we could accomplish if we did the same for all living things. Said, her voice trembling passionately, These arguments expose the core of the conflict between honoring and the meanwhile, the desire to foster a more compassionate, interconnected ecology and the unbending laws of nature. Discord posts using hashtags like #WildCompassion were pushed on social media. Local web forums were inundated with environmental queries, with some members narrating their personal experiences with creatures that didn't fit the mold and other people's cautions that these abnormalities could be harmful if. A community divided between those who believed the experience to be miraculous was exposed by the misconstrued digital discourse, indication of hope, and others who were concerned that interfering with instincts could have unintended repercussions. The intensity of emotions expressed online frequently permeated local conversations, widening the gap between idealists and pragmatists. Returned to Emily's house, a haven that had come to represent optimism and interspecies harmony. The family's initial happiness at having brought a wild animal into their home was sucked up in their own internal conflict. Worry about what these sudden changes in the woodland would mean for Emily's husband now tempered their midst. At first, a supporter of sensible boundaries expressed worries about the possible risks of over-identifying. He warned, "We need to be careful during a peaceful family meal, or we risk blurring the line with the wild." Between intervention and rescue. However, their kids continue to be captivated by the notion that even the most vicious predators could be benevolent and use their naive voices to remind people of the unexpected beauty. Compassion. Every night, as the sun set, Jack and Officer Ryan would gather around a tiny bonfire on the edge of the forest, where the fires are creating fluttering shadows on their exhausted faces. In serious moments, they discussed not only the course of their inquiry, but also the moral ramifications of interfering with the natural flow of things. Are we getting too involved? Jack thought out loud one evening, his gaze glued to the flashing flames. Or is our sympathy precisely what is required to mend a damaged system? These discussions filled with the deep internal tension that now defined their mission was brought to light by both idealism and practical caution. All of these overlapping stories, the split community, the rescuers' internal conflict, and the contradictory actions of the animals and the deluge of online conversation created a rich tapestry. Exchanges that highlighted the difficulties of navigating a society where the boundaries between instinct and empathy are blurred were unclear. Each person's heart was troubled by the dilemma of whether mankind had the right or the obligation to change the course of nature when it displayed unexpectedly sweet moments amidst its harshness. A new, unnerving tension started to creep in as the area gradually became quieter following the frenzied chaos. One that, just when it appeared that the dominant bear's moment of unexpected dominance was about to happen, suggested that there were deeper forces at work in the forest. The mood drastically changed, suggesting that compassion could result in a tenuous peace. The shocking act of kindness had already upset the delicate balance between predator and prey, and it was about to be confronted by a very different series of events late one foggy afternoon when the dim light came through the thick canopy as Jack returned to the area to record any remaining signs of the prior encounter. He noticed something odd as he used his camera to survey the area. A number of new, intentional. Unlike the chaotic marks from the earlier fighting, there were markings on the soft dirt that had not previously existed. These traces were precise and well organized, almost as though they were made by a tool rather than by the organic motion of the creatures. Jack became aware that someone might have been in the clearing following the altercation, leaving behind evidence that suggested a human presence in secret at that same moment alone. The woodland started to fill with a steady hum that was different from the rustle of leaves or the far-off cries of birds. The hum seemed to have been triggered by a machine deep in the forest, increased in volume, causing a nervous mutter among the local onlookers who had started to assemble close to the clearing some. Thought it might have something to do with recent allegations of illicit logging activities on the edge of the woodland, while some muttered that sophisticated monitoring or tracking devices were in use, keeping an eye on the wild in a way that was concerning and invasive at the same time. On social media was flooded with anonymous images using hashtags like forest mystery and hidden intruders. Users shared grainy Pictures and brief audio clips taken using their smartphones. Pictures of mysterious individuals moving covertly close to the affected area, and the distinct sound of strange machinery. A user by the name of Wilderness Watcher posted a shaky video of a person wearing black attire in the distance. The digital babble was being carefully adjusted by what looked like a small portable gadget next to a group of trees. Added a fresh perspective to the developing drama by raising the prospect that human interests, possibly motivated by profit or these digital hints spread like wildfire, revealing sinister intentions that were secretly disrupting the natural order. At a hurriedly scheduled meeting in the town, local law enforcement and environmental activists were more and more nervous. Hall officials discussed what these new reports mean if someone is. There could be disastrous repercussions if wildlife is purposefully observed or even manipulated for profit. In contrast, one environmentalist spoke in a voice that was shaking with urgency. A wary policeman said, "We need to confirm these allegations before drawing any judgments. But if they are accurate, we are facing a significant infringement on nature." Amid the escalating tension outside, the animal kingdom itself seemed to respond to the recent disruptions that the bear group had experienced minutes earlier, displayed an uncommon act of compassion, and started to show symptoms of restlessness. The dominant, the bear whose earlier act of kindness had momentarily calmed the mood, was now pacing tensely close to the edge of the, cleansing its once clouded eyes with a compassion that changed to a. The rest of the bear pack became uneasy as it detected the encroachment of something unfamiliar. Normally coordinated motions turning chaotic, as though they were also torn between instinct and an impending danger. The neglected wolves who had previously been left behind appeared even more vulnerable as they crammed into a clump, their gazes flitting uneasily between the bears' massive bodies and the unidentified disturbances at the edge of the forest near Emily's house, a haven that had lately come to represent. The family heard alarming news about interspecies compassion, a neighbor who had been keeping a close eye on local social media accounts called Emily, and there had been rumors of odd devices close to the people along the woodland edge claim that someone is observing the fauna with sophisticated equipment. The news triggered a Emily mine, whose heart had been warmed by the tender rescue of the newborn wolf in the home, felt a wave of anxiety come through. There was a chilling fear that the previous stories deed of. Since compassion has unintentionally drawn harmful attention, the community's internal dynamics have become more split. While arguments continued at a later town hall meeting, local activists called for prompt action to keep the forest safe from what they called technological exploitation, since our wilderness is precious. In the middle of these contentious arguments, Jack was given another anonymous email, this time containing a mysterious note signed The Sentinel. When the forest is observed by human eyes, its secrets are not concealed, but rather exploited. The message said, "Look deeper into the truth that unites us all is hidden in the darkness where the robots hide." The message was a place pin designating a hidden location close to a thicket at the edge of the forest. Jack, now weighed down by the need to record and an increasing sense of urgency, realized that this fresh lead might hold the secret to exposing a wider plot that threatened to taint the wilderness's core. As night descended over the village was split by the forest, and the formerly peaceful clearing throbbed with a mixture of terror, curiosity, and resolve. Conflicting narratives were now confronted with a growing crisis that called into question not just their comprehension of nature's cruelty, as well as their faith in the entities who could be controlling every rumor that is spread and every online post that is made. And each mysterious letter raised the stakes, turning the predicament of the wolves that were left behind from a single tragedy become a representation of more widespread systemic abuse in the days after the startling incident in the clearing. The story of the bear pack and the wolves who were left behind started to form a web of related subplots that emphasized the delicate balance between nature's chaos and unexpected compassion, while also deepening the mystery. What at first seemed to be a single tragic event eventually showed layers of intricacy connecting environmental disrupts, historical trends, and individual experiences into a more comprehensive narrative of local exploitation and survival. Already startled by the spectacular occurrences, wildlife monitors began to discover a unsettling trend. A number of hikers reported discovering similar, mysteriously neat claw markings and strange patterns in the forest's underbrush in different areas. This suggested that someone may have been tampering with the marks, which were too exact to be the product of random animal behavior. Laura, an experienced local naturalist, combined these data to create a comprehensive map of the natural order that. Her map, which she posted on community forums with hashtags like Forest Mystery, revealed that regions close to logging sites and these odd disruptions were more likely to appear in areas with recent industrial activity. Patterns sparked disturbing concerns about whether outside parties were systematically taking advantage of the forest, forces, or even corporate interests, attempting to regulate nearby wildlife populations. Over time, rumors about an enigmatic person started to circulate on social media. Users who were keen nature photographers and bird observers reported seeing a person wearing black attire was spotted close to the impacted locations in one video uploaded by a user by the name of Wilderness Watcher briefly saw this someone meticulously modifying what seemed to be a tiny electronic device near a trail. These digital hints gave a new conspiratorial dimension to the developing drama. Raises the possibility that cutting-edge technology could be used to observe and maybe control the forest residents' activities. Fear and curiosity were stoked by the notion that human intervention was not only feasible but also intentional, which fueled a expanding internet campaign calling for accountability, while the local historical society, headed by the legendary Mr. Redbird, discovered historical documents that depicted a somber image of the area's previous decades' worth of municipal reports and newspaper clippings. Reported instances of unexplained wildlife disruptions that coincided with times of violent industrial. These documents described how UI and the forest would respond to periods of uncontrolled poaching and rapid destruction, frequently respond with erratic outbursts of aggression and strange conduct among its fauna. Mr. Redbird Kais, with his extensive understanding of native law, clarified that these historical occurrences were occasionally seen as a message from nature or a call to restore equilibrium before permanent harm was done, and his research included a historical layer to the current circumstance, suggesting that the recent occurrences were a part of a recurrent cycle rather than isolated anomalies of upheaval and vengeance. Amidst these developing human tale, subplots started to appear from the neighborhood. Emily, whose house had previously been a haven for rescued wildlife, was struggling with mixed feelings after her first meeting with a baby wolf had filled. The growing allegations of economic exploitation and technological meddling filled her with awe and hope. Shadow over her late-night encounter while she watched the digital video from Emily's inner forest was surrounded by security cameras, and she heard anonymous messages alerting her to potential invaders. As the chaos increased, she started to wonder if the haven they had constructed was presently threatened by entities much more malevolent than simple indifference. I'm concerned that our deed of compassion might have attracted unwelcome attention, she revealed to a close friend. Her openness brought attention to the delicate balance between wanting to assist and being afraid of getting caught up in a bigger, more perilous battle. Simultaneously, Jack, the industrious hiker who had first received a string of unsolicited emails from a person posing as the sentinel, which were recorded at the scene. When the forest weeps in silence, its guardians must listen, said the cryptic Phil one message, to stand up to preserve its legacy. Every email strengthened Jack's determination, combining his personal goal with the letter not only provided inspiration, but also spoke to a larger demand for environmental justice. The existence of a covert local conservationist network that had been keeping an eye out for indications of exploitation throughout time as local fauna and these digital historical and human narratives came together. Experts were planning an urgent symposium to deal with the escalating situation. Reputable environmental researcher Dr. Elenina Morales gave a presentation with satellite information that revealed a link between regions with high levels of industrial activity and the sites of uncommon disturbances to animals. Our research shows that human encroachment combined with the usage of The systematic manipulation of animals may be facilitated by sophisticated tracking and monitoring systems. Conduct, she described at the seminar, and her research provided a scientific foundation for the community's mounting concerns that the forest was being impacted by forces outside of it. This complex combination of digital recordings, historical records, and anonymous natural rhythms, personal accounts and cautions started to combine to create a coherent story that, once perceived as a singular tragedy, the condition of abandoned wolves was suddenly exposed as a sign of more extensive, systemic nature exploitation. The notion that influential local interests may be exploiting the use of technology to thwart and benefit from wildlife conservation initiatives gave the inquiry an extra degree of urgency. Some intense arguments broke out in town hall meetings and community forums. Outraged and grieving individuals called for swift punishment against those accused of meddling in the forest. Those who were cautious but resolute demanded a thorough probe should record the entire scope of the exploitation prior to any severe actions being taken to bridge this ideological divide. Highlighted the community's difficulty balancing the necessity of prompt action with the knowledge of a methodical, evidence-based strategy that takes into account the forest's whole legacy. Ancient trees silently witnessed the drama unfolding via their whispered secrets and unwavering tenacity. The interaction of contemporary technology with the ancient natural order between human aspirations and the innate unpredictability gave the story a captivating complexity, and every new piece of evidence, digital post and archival, the document supported the idea that the exploitation of the environment was a cycle that kept happening and that required not only the recovery of the wolves that had been left behind, but also an examination of the factors that continued to support such brutality. As the complex subplots came together and the community's suspicions intensified, there was a noticeable sense of unease and tension surrounding the growing body of information regarding the deserted wolves, and the enigmatic human intervention reached a turning point. From the cryptic digital messages and anonymous recordings to the exact, systematic traces left in the forest, sparked a heated discussion among local leaders and wildlife specialists. The event could no longer be written off as a singular natural disaster. Rather, it was now recognized as a sign of a wider systemic exploitation of the wild that posed a threat to the natural equilibrium and revealed a sinister beneath the surface of human interference and corporate greed. At a specially called town hall gathering that was held in the crowded, there was a sense of urgency in the local community center's auditorium, with opposing viewpoints between environmentalists and animal welfare activists called for prompt, decisive action, saying, "This isn't just about it's about our entire forest," one passionate speaker said, tears running down her face. A few abandoned wolves being taken advantage of by those who profit from illicit logging and sophisticated surveillance at the price of nature. Her remarks reverberated off the walls, bringing up memories of earlier catastrophes and escalating the public's wrath. But in sharp contrast, a group of we must base our decisions on careful local leaders and some longtime citizens' warnings against rash involvement. On concrete evidence, Councilman Harris argued in a calm but forceful tone. While we cannot deny that wild animals act instinctively, despite the unsettling nature of the digital posts and eyewitness reports, any intervention without a thorough assessment could have unforeseen repercussions that could interfere with the. Despite being reasonable, this pragmatic viewpoint compromises the delicate equilibrium of our ecology, merely widen the gap, creating the conditions for a passionate confrontation between realists and idealists. In the midst of the heated discussion, the evidence kept growing, and Jack Mai's careful fieldwork had recorded each odd footprint and each suspicious piece of technology, and he provided a thorough PowerPoint of his, identifying the remains of a sophisticated tracking device in high-resolution photos of painstakingly engraved claw marks, fragment, and even the digital coordinates from emails sent by anonymous users were displayed on the screen. "Is interwoven," Jack said, his voice ringing with a mixture of resolve and rage. "These indications aren't coincidental. They indicate intentional, planned meddling with entities that value our forest being observed and controlled. profit over the sacredness of nature. And as his words sank in the anonymous messages, the room fell into a deep stillness. With hashtags like concealed, the Sentinel has already generated a lot of online indignation, including one signed. Testimonies from local hikers and wildlife photographers about intruders and forest mysteries gave personal significance to. Each report from the study supported the notion that the forest was no longer a pure haven, but rather a battlefield where the natural order was being invaded by modern technology. Then the community's internal conflict was encapsulated in a moment by renowned environmental researcher Dr. Elena. With a composed yet urgent demeanor, Morales addressed the stage to introduce her most current field reports and satellite data that revealed an unsettling relationship between the areas of industrial activities and the odd disruptions. The data indicates that these aren't unique instances of bad luck. Morales clarified, they're a part of a common pattern that's probably connected to illicit logging operations and technical monitoring intended to keep an eye on and, in certain situations, regulate wildlife behavior. Exploitation will only get worse if we do nothing. Even the skeptics were obliged to consider the possibility that human involvement was present when statements supported by scientific facts. As the gathering went on, voices increased, undermining the entire character of the wild. An ardent activist who was louder and more divisive, Miss Alvarez, called for urgent. If we wait much longer, legal action will be taken against individuals suspected of planning these disturbances. She declared, forest will become nothing more than a controlled commodity. Her passionate appeal was accepted by both cheers and anxiety as locals realized the serious consequences of speaking up against. When an anonymous video clip was shown, the tension between strong, potentially related interests peaked. A hazy, shaky recording of a shadowy person is clearly seen on the enormous screen. Seen in the video fixing a small, contemporary equipment close to the edge of the forest. Caught by an unidentified hiker validated what many had assumed to be. The wild gasps were caused by intentional human orchestrations that reverberated throughout the audience as the situation's truth became apparent. This is our wake-up call. We can no longer ignore the exploitation of our people, Jack said in a voice that was shaking with anger. Natural heritage, each animal, each footprint, and each recorded sound in the forest is an appeal for assistance in that tense moment when the community had to face a terrible reality. The fight for these wolves that had been left behind was representative of a greater struggle between the sacredness of nature and the precise technological evidence, the anonymous messages, the sneaky powers of industrial exploitation, and the passionate discussions had come together to create an unquestionable argument that called for action. The formerly passive wilderness was now a frontline in the struggle for environmental justice, and the public was unwilling to keep quiet any longer. The attendees of the town hall meeting departed with troubled hearts and resolute minds, burdened by the understanding that the future of the forest and its defenseless residents depended on our combined commitment. It was evident that the community would not tolerate this exploitation going unchecked, and they promised to take every legal action possible outlet and to encourage independent research that would reveal the complete scope of human intervention. The tension that had pervaded the room was pulling at the fabric of their wild, indicating that a significant turning moment had been reached, one that would influence the forest's future and serve as evidence of the strength of unified voices. When the growing dissatisfaction in the community and the digital buzz collided with injustice, the stakes in the forest reached a crescendo with the scary sightings, the painstakingly charted anomalies, and the anonymous letters. These dark shapes had all suggested a purposeful disruption of the natural order, which is now present in a hurried, arranged gathering at the neighborhood community center. The group's resolve to stop these intrusions became the audience was crowded, with a tense atmosphere and a mixture of raw emotions as the final appeal for decisive action. Feeling, neighborhood activists, wildlife specialists, law enforcement officers, and the community members assembled, their faces lit by emergency lights and the flickering screens showing the. Jack stood with a resolute expression as he presented the most recent facts, ready to deliver the thorough report that had been put together after weeks of unrelenting research Jack started, with his voice resonating throughout the space. "We have obtained indisputable proof that our forest is not merely succumbing to life's inherent hardships, but is being methodically taken advantage of by outside factors. These disruptions, the mysterious people on the video, and the abnormally accurate claw marks the tracking devices left behind are not haphazard. Rather, they are a part of a planned scheme to manage and capitalize on our wild." A mutter of agreement was heard, and a number of heads nodded solemnly in acknowledgement of Officer Ryan, who had long changed from an indifferent enforcer to a fervent supporter of wildlife conservation, and came forward when his eyes. Months of seeing the tragic situation of the wolves that were left behind raced through the gathered audience stole my heart. "We are here to combat a system that regards these wolves as abandoned, in addition to saving their lives," he said, "considering nature as merely a resource that may be exploited for financial gain. We have a moral duty to preserve this forest and all of its residents, and we cannot permit the natural principles that have controlled these countries for generations have been altered by technology and human avarice." His appeal resonated with many who had experienced the pain of previous exploitation at that time. The last piece of the jigsaw was unveiled by local investigative journalist Mark Rivera, who unfolded a hefty envelope, packed with private records, financial records, internal memoranda, and eyewitness accounts that linked a significant local company to a network of unlawful wildlife monitoring. And Mark clarified that these documents are devastating since they demonstrate exploitation, pattern of intentional disturbance. "This is a systematic misuse of our resources, not a case of nature taking its course." Natural heritage. He strolled with a steady voice and a meticulous exposition. The audience with each piece of proof, eliminating any possibility of misunderstanding, and the room fell into a thick silence as the emotions were running high, and some audience members sobbed aloud during the. Others clenched their hands in wordless rage at the idea of their cherished woodland being exploited like a commodity. A heated argument broke out among the attendees, with some activists calling for prompt judicial action against the guilty parties, that the offenders lose their authority and face legal consequences. "We need to demonstrate to them that no," one speaker cried, her voice shaking with rage, "one is above nature." Yet there was also a contingent of practical. Officials warned a top council against taking a hasty, reactionary response. A member with years of experience on his face said, "Even though our feelings are legitimate, we must make sure that our response is measured and supported by unquestionable facts." Their rash choice could interfere with continuing conservation initiatives and could perhaps have unforeseen repercussions for the ecosystem. His calm tone aimed to, after hours of heated debate, strike a compromise between the requirement for a full legal due process and the unfiltered expression of public opinion. After some debate, a breakthrough was reached, and the task committee suggested a two-pronged approach that would deal with the more general structural problems that underlie the present demand for accountability, as well as, first, they would formally complain to the authorities about the forest's exploitation, utilizing the compelling evidence that the environmental team and Jack Tunmar collected. Second, they would establish a separate oversight group made up of legal professionals, wildlife specialists, and community members, activists and indigenous representatives from the area to keep an eye on the situation, implement more stringent laws, and create long-term plans to protect the natural habitat. Officer Ryan, with calm determination, encapsulated the group's choice today, where we decide to not only hold those accountable, but additionally, our goal is to eliminate the network of exploitation and restore our forest for future generations. The harmony between the purity of the wild and human advancement, his words, were greeted with thunderous acclaim and a feeling of solidarity, infused with a mixture of grief and steadfast resolve, that overcame the earlier gap between practicality and idealism as the gathering. A fresh sense of purpose permeated the air as the meeting was adjourned and the community scattered into the chilly, rain-soaked night. Teams started creating official complaints, and private detectives were called in to follow up on each lead social. Supportive posts using hashtags like Wild Justice and Unprotect Forest flooded the media as people vowed to Jack stood at the entryway of the community center, advocating for unity against any additional exploitation of the natural world. Looking up at the black sky for a long time in that silent, contemplative, he hesitated as he saw the scope of their endeavor, a dedication that went well beyond the suffering of a particular group. He whispered to himself, "We have taken the first decisive step, and that we would continue to battle until every shadow of exploitation is exposed." This last conflict was the result of widespread ire, thorough research, and a mutual enthusiasm for preserving the wild marked. Not a conclusion, but rather the start of a larger, just movement in which every voice, from the tiniest creature to the largest, as nightfall approaches, the most powerful members of the community would be unified in their pursuit of justice and environmental rejuvenation. The tension in the clearing reached an almost intolerable climax as the woodland was enveloped in a gloomy blackness. Signs of human intervention, the bleak pictures of wolves left behind, and the surprising actions of the bear pack had turned the solitary incident into a major one, crisis that endangered the area's natural equilibrium beneath the shroud of night. The clearing is now a temporary. The focal point on ardent debate was a memorial of the disturbed land and the strewn remains of the previous anarchy. Ryan Emily, a convergent Jack officer, and a group of regional wildlife specialists and community activists assembled once more, their features illuminated by the portable lantern's wavering light, and the eerie, far-off illumination of smartphones made everyone in that group uncomfortably. Given that the forest had silently witnessed decades of human activity, the stakes had never been higher. Now that exploitation was about to undergo a radical reckoning, Jack started by. People had brought the ancient, melancholy woodland to this point, where it was silent. Jack, a witness to a conflict between the untamed instincts of nature and the pernicious grasp of human avarice, raised his. As he spoke to the group, his voice reverberated in the silence. Everything we have learned pointed to one indisputable fact. He spoke in a tone that wavered with passion, and he resolved that these wolves' suffering isn't a random act of. Nature is the product of intentional exploitation, and we must make the most important decision of our time. Do we let this vicious cycle of cruelty persist in our lives, or do we break it? His words lingered in the air like a challenge, inspiring a collective roar of resolve at the sight of our concerted action. Officer Ryan's transition from severe enforcer to an ardent guardian had been nothing at that point. Quite amazing. He entered the circle with his eyes still sparkling from. Everybody in attendance felt the weight of the tumult from the previous week. Having witnessed the faces of these defenseless, deserted animals begging for. His voice was quiet but angry as he said, "Mercy, we're not just here to save them. However, this is our stand for justice in order to reveal and destroy the network that has been taking advantage of our wild for financial gain. Every life that the dark has attempted to take." His announcement was greeted with a passionate applause and a collective pledge that reverberated throughout the meadow, and amid the intense quiet, the previously unidentified video clip was shown on a big portable screen. Blurry photos displayed a person in black clothes carefully adjusting a tiny equipment close to the border of the woodland, demonstrating high-tech surveillance, together with the digital traces and internal memos, created a devastating image of human hands purposefully disrupted the natural order, taking advantage of life's basic essence for financial gain, and our startled silence descended over the. Eventually, as the truth of this clandestine operation became clear and the digital data eliminated all possibility of uncertainty and rumors, seemed to be prompted by the collective wrath, and abruptly erupted into a roar of indignation. After community pressure, law enforcement finally mobilized, as evidenced by the distant sirens' cries, was a relief and a sign of the fight ahead at that crucial juncture. As if nature were holding its breath for the approaching event, the forest itself seemed to throb with excitement. Conflict between those who would defend it and those who had the audacity to control it. Jack's gaze fell on a last terrifying. One of his photos had a detail in the background that was just barely apparent through the thick foliage, of a unique emblem that resembled the one on the monitor and device fragment. This emblem signifying a strong local company with a slick exterior and a clandestine interior that validated the worst suspicions of. The corporation was heavily involved in the systematic use of sophisticated methods to exploit the wild, technology to track and manage animal numbers for financial gain. Knowing these creatures' misery was caused by such a powerful force sparked a wave of righteous rage among. Officer Ryan moved forward once more as the gathering gathered, his voice now. We are shaking with both determination and sadness because we have allowed our forest to be exploited like a commodity, he declared. This is about a system, not just one incident. His emotional outburst devalues every life, and we say enough is enough today, was greeted by thunderous cheers and resolute nods from everyone in the room during that pivotal moment when the task force unanimously decided that in addition to submitting official legal complaints, they would also start a comprehensive public investigation into the company's operations that called for responsibility and openness. A plan was initiated. Independent investigators would collect additional information, legal teams would be called in, and as daylight broke, a community-led oversight group would be formed to protect the forest's future, to appear over the horizon, casting a gentle, hopeful glow across the clearing. The mood changed from one of unadulterated stress to one of serious determination. Everyone in attendance realized that the struggle for the soul of the forest had reached its zenith, and that the measures implemented in that pivotal moment would have an impact much beyond the forest's bounds and the brutality that had threatened to. Now, the complete power of a unified community would confront the delicate balance of nature with one last. Officer Ryan made the following group vow. We will fight for every exploited creature, for each hushed wild voice, until justice is more than a dream, it is a reality. The sounds reverberating through the clearing served as a ray of hope and a wake-up call that would signal the beginning of their fight against systemic exploitation. The amazing events of that terrible night came to an end when the forest was lighted by the first rays of dawn, into a deeply contemplative quiet that reverberated throughout the neighborhood. What had developed into an epic after starting as a heartbreaking incident in which a pack of strong bears found a bunch of wolves who had been abandoned, of shocking disclosure and, eventually, rejuvenation following the tumultuous. Finally, all of the information and hushed testimonies had combined to show not just the unfiltered harshness of nature, but also the untapped possibility of change when compassion and group effort step in. The remains of the bloody altercation were gradually being cleaned up in the clearing where the last encounter occurred, assimilated the painstakingly recorded claw marks into the forest structure. The remains of advanced technology and the enigmatic symbols that had alluded to a larger network of exploitation now served as glaring reminders of the unseen forces that had disrupted the community's natural order. But this was not a single violent incident. It served as a wake-up call to address systemic misuse that has jeopardized the fragile equilibrium of the transformation of crazy Officer Ryan from a strict enforcer to a sympathetic protector who had come to represent the fight, now spoke quietly and authoritatively at a memorial service for to the untamed and injured. Every living creature in this forest needs to exist without being exploited or treated cruelly, he said to a group of local residents, wildlife specialists, and activists. Comments, which were filled with both sadness and optimism, captured the community's collective dedication to preserving nature, which was a promise that the wrongs done to the forest, our priceless legacy, would be protected with every effort to ensure that abandoned wolves were not left unanswered. Resource accessible, such as Jackie Torty, whose unrelenting reporting and the movement had been energized by the pursuit of truth, and a local newspaper had given a thorough description of the events. Raw and reflective narratives detail the progression from initial shock to the last call to action. For in the midst of chaos, we learned that environmental justice is not. His remarks struck a chord in a world of sporadic cruelty, but where every act of exploitation is a cry for assistance, with readers igniting broad conversations about the value of protecting natural areas and there's an immediate need for local authorities to hold individuals who exploit nature accountable. had acted decisively to begin official inquiries into the unlawful activities after facing intense public criticism. Following the discovery of monitoring and exploitation, legal teams were called in, and an impartial oversight group made up of legal experts, community activists, and wildlife specialists and local indigenous group representatives were set up to keep an eye on the situation. Their task was clear to eliminate the exploitation network and guarantee the restoration of the forest's equilibrium, preserving it for upcoming generations. This firm move signaled a sea change in the community's fight against the forces attempting to regulate and commercialize the unruly social media sites, which were once raging with rumors and anger, were turned into lively places of solidarity and optimism. Locally, people were posting personal stories with hashtags like Wild Justice and Mod Restore the Wild, images and supportive remarks. These digital voices are bound together by a shared desire to preserve the environment, strengthened the need for responsibility, and created a revitalized feeling of environmental stewardship. The collaborative digital movement not only increased the authorities' level of pressure, but also acted as a reminder that the pursuit of justice was a collective duty that went beyond personal encounters with Emily and her family, who had previously opened their house as a refuge for rescued animals. The incidents had permanently altered the house, which had come to represent kindness and hope, was now used as a forum for community discussions. In private family discussions, they discussed how to live in harmony with the nature, talked about the importance of what was happening and the important empathy lessons they had gained. It's more than just preserving a few animals, Emily thought quietly, and it's about resilience and the interconnectedness of all life. Tonight, it's about respecting the long-standing connection between people and the natural world, and her sincere remarks ensure that this relationship directs our future efforts. Struck a profound chord with the family, fortifying their determination to push for a more humane cohabitation. As the days stretched into weeks, the community's combined efforts started to pay off in the investigations. Deepened governmental policies were re-examined, and the voices of both humans and animals, both strong and weak, were heard, gathered in unison to demand justice for the forest that had been devastated by exploitation. And violence gradually started to mend its ancient trees, which stood as quiet guardians of a new environmental period. Regeneration, we appreciate your participation in this stirring voyage through the depths of nature's brutality and its potential for rebirth, of the tale of how a pack of bears found wolves who had been abandoned and the ensuing disclosures of hidden. If exploitation has affected you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment with your ideas. We encourage you to join us below as we continue to defend our wild areas and hold those who take advantage of them accountable. Keep checking back for more information on holding nature responsible and fostering the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. Uplifting tales that serve as a reminder that hope always finds a way, even in the most dire circumstances.